She woke up before the sun that morning, the quiet stillness of the apartment around her broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. It was the kind of morning that made the day feel endless even before it began. She rubbed her eyes and stretched, feeling the stiffness of sleep and the weight of another long day ahead. Her life had settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and draining. She worked at a small, busy cafe downtown, serving tables, taking orders, and trying her best to bring warmth into a place that often felt rushed and cold. The cafe was not fancy. It had a few tables, a worn counter, and a piano tucked into the corner, often ignored by most of the customers. She loved that piano, though few people knew she could play. Sometimes, when the cafe was quiet, she would sit down and let her fingers move over the keys, the music filling the room in a way words never could. But those moments were private, fleeting, and always cut short by the constant rhythm of customers, orders, and dishes clattering in the kitchen. She dressed quickly, choosing her uniform with care, smoothing her apron and tucking stray strands of hair behind her ears. As she left the apartment and stepped into the early morning air, she carried a small bag with her essentials and a notebook tucked inside. The notebook was filled with scribbled melodies and unfinished pieces of music, small fragments of a world she kept mostly to herself. She walked to the cafe along streets that were just beginning to stir with life, the city waking slowly around her. She liked these quiet moments before the chaos of the day, the way the soft light fell on the buildings and made the world seem gentle, almost forgiving. When she arrived at the cafe, the morning rush had not yet begun. The smell of fresh coffee greeted her as she opened the door, and the familiar clatter of cups and plates came from the kitchen. She exchanged quick greetings with the barista and her coworkers, a small team that relied on each other to keep things running smoothly. She moved behind the counter, wiping down surfaces and setting out menus, all the while thinking about the day ahead. Some days were easy, filled with kind customers and light chatter. Other days were harder, with impatient or rude visitors who seemed to forget the human on the other side of the counter. She had learned to take it all in stride, to smile even when it hurt, because she knew that losing her temper would not make anyone's day better. The first customers arrived slowly, a mix of familiar faces and new ones. She greeted each one warmly, taking orders with precision and care. She noticed the little things, the way someone's eyes lit up at a perfectly made latte, the way a child's laughter could change the mood of the entire room. These moments reminded her why she kept doing this job, why she showed up each day even when she felt tired or overlooked. There was a quiet satisfaction in serving others, in being part of their small daily rituals, even if no one ever knew the story behind the hands that brought them their food or drinks. Between orders, she allowed herself a moment to glance at the piano. It sat there in the corner, polished but often ignored, as if waiting for someone to finally notice it. She thought about the first time she had touched those keys, how the music had seemed to flow naturally from her fingers. It had been years ago, when she was a child with dreams bigger than her small town and a heart full of ambition. Life had shifted her plans, responsibilities had grown heavier, and the piano had become more of a companion than a path to a future. But she still remembered the joy it brought her, the way the notes could carry her away from the mundane and into a world entirely her own. Her thoughts were interrupted by the bell above the door, signaling the arrival of a new customer. She straightened, offering her usual warm smile, and took their order. It was a group of people, laughing loudly, talking over each other, filling the small space with energy that was almost overwhelming. She noted the way they glanced at her, a flicker of curiosity mixed with something else. Amusement, perhaps, or disbelief. She shook off the feeling, focusing on her work. Some people came to cafes expecting more than just food and drinks. They wanted entertainment, they wanted something extra. She had learned not to assume anything, to let each encounter unfold without judgment. As the morning wore on, the cafe filled. The sound of coffee machines, conversations, and the occasional laughter of children created a rhythm that was both exhausting and comforting. She moved through the space with practiced ease, balancing plates and drinks, refilling cups, and offering small gestures of kindness wherever she could. She noticed a few customers watching her with interest, their eyes lingering a moment longer than necessary. She smiled politely, wondering if they were simply being friendly, or if they sensed something in her that she had long kept hidden. During a brief lull, she finally allowed herself to approach the piano. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, just to feel the familiar texture beneath her fingertips. It was a quiet, almost secret ritual, a way to reconnect with a part of herself that often went unnoticed. She thought about the pieces she had composed in her notebook, melodies that told stories she had never shared with anyone. Music had always been her voice, a way to express feelings that words could never capture. She pressed a few notes, letting them hang in the air, and for a moment, the cafe seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for more. But the sound was quickly swallowed by the clamor of the morning, and she returned to her duties, carrying a small spark of joy with her that no one else could see. Her co-workers admired her silently, though they rarely said so. They had watched her move through the cafe with grace and efficiency, handling difficult customers and chaotic moments with a calmness that seemed almost unnatural. They knew she had a talent, something beyond the ordinary, but they had never seen it fully revealed. She herself wondered if she would ever have the courage to share that part of herself openly, or if it was meant to remain a private sanctuary, a place where she could retreat when the world became too loud. The day passed in a blur of orders, small interactions, and moments of quiet observation. She noticed the little stories around her. The way a couple held hands across the table, the way a young child pointed excitedly at a pastry, the way an older man read his newspaper with a contented sigh. Each of these moments was fleeting, but together they formed the tapestry of the cafe, a living, breathing world that she was a part of in ways both visible and unseen. She moved through it all with care, aware of the fragility and beauty of each encounter, even as the hours stretched on and her energy waned. As the morning rush began to slow, she found a brief moment to herself behind the counter. She leaned against it, taking a deep breath, and allowed herself to feel the tiredness in her body. But along with the fatigue came a sense of quiet satisfaction, a feeling that she had done her best, that she had met each challenge with patience and dignity. She glanced once more at the piano, her heart tugged by the memory of melodies waiting to be played, stories waiting to be told. She wondered if anyone would ever hear them, or if they were destined to remain her private refuge, known only to her fingers and her heart. Just as she was about to return to the floor, the bell above the door rang again. A new group of customers entered, and she noticed immediately that they were different from the usual crowd. They carried themselves with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, laughing loudly and speaking in tones that filled the small space with authority. She felt a flicker of apprehension, sensing that these patrons were not going to be like the others. They were going to challenge her in ways she had not yet imagined. But she straightened, smoothing her apron and preparing to face whatever came next. She had faced difficult customers before, had weathered criticism and laughter and impatience. She could handle this too. And as she took their orders, smiling politely and listening carefully to their requests, she felt a small, almost imperceptible thrill. Something was about to happen, something that would test her in ways she had not expected. She did not yet know that this day, which had begun like so many others, would become unforgettable. The music she carried within her, the talent she had kept hidden, was about to find its moment. And though she did not yet realize it, the world around her was about to take notice in a way she had never imagined. The group that had just entered immediately drew attention. Their laughter was loud, sharp, almost cutting through the usual hum of the cafe. They carried themselves like they owned the space, speaking over each other and barely noticing the other customers. She felt a flicker of unease but forced herself to stay composed. She had dealt with difficult patrons before, the ones who acted like the world revolved around them, and she had always found a way to remain calm, polite, and professional. They were seated near the piano, which made her heart beat a little faster. Somehow she knew they would notice it. It was impossible not to. The piano had a presence of its own, polished and gleaming in the corner of the room. She tried not to think about it too much and approached their table with a menu in hand, her hands steady despite the little tremor in her chest. "Good morning," she said, smiling politely. "Can I get you anything to start?" The tallest one of the group looked up at her with a smirk, as if he had been expecting someone else entirely. "Hey," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Do you play?" His voice carried amusement, almost mockery. She tilted her head slightly, unsure of how to respond. "Ah, yes," she said carefully, her voice soft but clear. She felt the eyes of the entire table on her, scrutinizing her in a way that made her stomach twist. She had always known her talent was unusual in a setting like this. Few people ever expected a waitress to have a skill like hers, and she had learned over time that most reactions were mixed. Some polite curiosity, others doubt, and occasionally outright laughter. They laughed. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made her want to shrink into herself, to disappear into the background. "You play?" one of them said, shaking his head. "Come on. You're a waitress, not a performer." Their laughter grew louder, and the other customers glanced over, some with mild amusement, some with discomfort at the mockery. She felt a hot flush of embarrassment, but she didn't let it show. She kept her composure, holding the menu a little tighter and lowering her voice, even though it trembled slightly. "I do play," she said simply. She refused to let their laughter define her. She had learned over the years that talent alone was not always enough to command respect, but courage and calmness could carry her far. One of them leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Really?" he said, still grinning. "I want to see this. Play something for us. Right now." The others chuckled in agreement, nudging each other and exchanging amused glances. She could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of challenge and ridicule, and she realized that this was no ordinary request. They didn't genuinely want to hear music. They wanted to see her falter. Her hands itched to touch the piano, to let the music flow and fill the room, but doubt crept in. What if she wasn't good enough to impress them? What if their laughter grew louder once she began? Her heart raced, but beneath the fear was a spark of determination. She had hidden her talent for too long, keeping it tucked away as a secret treasure. Perhaps this was the moment to let it out. She started, pausing for a moment to collect herself. The group watched her closely, leaning forward as if waiting for her to fail. "I can play," she said finally. "If you'd like me to." There was a brief silence, then laughter, louder and sharper than before. "Yeah, right," one of them said. "I'll believe it when I hear it." They gestured toward the piano as if inviting her to prove herself, their amusement bordering on condescension. She walked toward the piano slowly, feeling the weight of their gazes on her back. Her fingers trembled slightly, brushing over the keys before she sat down. The piano felt familiar, comforting in its presence. She drew a deep breath, letting her fingers hover above the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the memories of years of practice, of quiet afternoons spent playing alone, of music that had always been her companion. The first notes she played were soft, almost hesitant. She could feel the group's surprise, though they masked it with skeptical glances. The melody began simple, delicate, as if testing the waters. But soon the music grew stronger, more confident. Her fingers moved with skill and grace, each note carrying emotion and depth that could not be denied. The cafe seemed to shift around her. Conversations quieted. Even the clatter of cups and dishes faded into the background. She looked up briefly, glancing at the group. Their laughter had stopped. Their smirks were gone, replaced by wide eyes and subtle movements of astonishment. One of them leaned forward, as if drawn in by something they hadn't expected. She continued to play, letting herself become lost in the music. Every note carried her story. The years of practice, the quiet moments of joy and frustration, the longing she had kept hidden. The room felt alive, almost magical, as the melody wove through the air. Customers who had been engrossed in their phones or conversations now stopped to listen. Some watched in awe, some in silence, and a few even held their breath. She felt a strange sense of freedom, the kind that comes when someone finally dares to share a part of themselves they had kept secret. For the first time in a long time, She didn't feel small or overlooked. She felt seen, in a way that was deeper than appearances or expectations. The group that had doubted her stared, unable to look away. Their earlier amusement had vanished, replaced by genuine surprise, even admiration. One of them opened his mouth, perhaps to say something mocking, but no words came. Another shifted in his seat, leaning closer, captivated by the music that seemed to fill every corner of the cafe. She noticed the subtle changes, the way their posture had softened, the way their eyes now focused fully on her hands and the piano keys. She let the music flow, her confidence growing with each passing moment. The melody became more complex, weaving emotions that words could never capture. She played with her whole heart, letting the years of hidden practice and quiet determination pour into every note. The cafe, once a space of routine and mundanity, now felt transformed, alive with sound and emotion. Even her co-workers paused in their tasks, watching with quiet amazement as she performed. Time seemed to stretch, each note hanging in the air, filling the space with something that was both powerful and intimate. She could feel the energy of the room, the shift from ridicule to awe. The group that had mocked her before was now silent, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock and wonder. They had expected a joke, a moment of entertainment at her expense. Instead, they were witnessing something real, something beautiful and unexpected. When she finally finished the piece, the silence that followed was almost complete. It was as if the cafe itself had been holding its breath. Then, slowly, one of the group members clapped, softly at first, uncertainly. Then another joined, louder this time. The applause grew, catching the attention of other customers who added their own. The room erupted with appreciation, a wave of sound that lifted her spirits and filled her with a sense of triumph she had never experienced before. She sat there for a moment, hands resting on the keys, heart racing. She allowed herself a small, private smile. This was more than just a performance. It was a statement, a quiet declaration that she was capable, that her talent was real, and that she would no longer hide it out of fear or doubt. The group that had challenged her looked at her with new respect, their previous arrogance replaced by humility and astonishment. "Wow," one of them finally said, shaking his head. "I didn't expect that." His voice was quiet, almost reverent. Another nodded, words failing them as they struggled to express their surprise. She smiled politely, standing up and stepping back from the piano, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment. She had faced their ridicule and turned it into something extraordinary. Her co-workers approached, offering congratulations and quiet praise. They had always known her potential, had always admired her skill, but seeing it displayed so openly, in front of people who doubted her, was something else entirely. She felt a sense of connection with them, a shared pride in a talent that had long been her secret. As she returned to her duties, taking orders and serving drinks, she noticed the subtle changes in the cafe. Conversations were livelier, smiles more genuine, and even the group that had challenged her seemed different. They were quieter, more thoughtful, as if they were reconsidering their assumptions, not just about her, but about what people were capable of. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she had not only performed but had changed the way they saw her, and perhaps the world around them. The day continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. She moved through the cafe with renewed energy, noticing the small gestures of appreciation and respect from customers and co-workers alike. She felt a sense of purpose, a clarity she had not felt in years. The piano, once a corner piece of furniture, had become a bridge between her hidden talent and the world, a reminder that courage and determination could transform even the most ordinary day into something unforgettable. And though the day was far from over, and there would still be challenges and interruptions, she knew something had changed. She had stepped into a moment of vulnerability and emerged with strength. She had faced laughter, doubt, and skepticism, and had turned it into something beautiful. The music she had played was more than sound. It was a statement of who she was, a testament to the power of persistence, passion, and self-belief. After the first piece, the cafe felt different, almost alive in a new way. She had returned to her duties, carrying drinks and taking orders, but the energy in the room lingered around her. Customers were watching her more closely now, not with casual curiosity but with genuine interest. Even those who had been silent or skeptical were paying attention, and she could feel it. There was a shift in the air, a quiet respect that had not been there before. But she knew the real test was still ahead. The group that had challenged her, the ones who had laughed and doubted her, were still seated near the piano, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. She could see it in their eyes. They were waiting, perhaps for another performance, or maybe just trying to process what they had just witnessed. Either way, she felt a surge of determination. She had played one piece well, but now she wanted to show them everything she could do. She wanted them to understand, not just through a single song, but through her music as a whole, that she was more than they had imagined. She excused herself from her table duties for a moment, taking a deep breath before moving toward the piano again. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and she closed her eyes briefly, letting herself focus on the music inside her. She thought about the countless hours she had spent practicing, the moments when she had played alone late at night, the melodies she had imagined in her mind but never shared. This was her chance to bring all of that to life, and she felt ready. She began softly at first, the notes delicate and careful, almost like a whisper. But gradually, as she became more immersed in the music, her confidence grew. The piece evolved, each note carrying more emotion than the last. It was not just a performance. It was a story, a reflection of her journey, her dreams, and her quiet perseverance. The group that had doubted her watched in stunned silence. Their earlier laughter completely vanished. They were witnessing something raw, something real, and it unsettled them. The music filled the room, moving seamlessly from gentle, flowing passages to powerful, dramatic chords. Every key she pressed seemed to carry her emotions: joy, sadness, longing, and triumph, all at once. Customers who had been engaged in conversations now paused, their attention drawn to the piano and the woman playing it. Some leaned forward, others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Even the barista behind the counter stopped mid-task, watching with admiration as the melody unfolded. She noticed subtle reactions from the group near the piano. One of them had his hands clasped together, leaning forward in disbelief, unable to look away. Another shifted uncomfortably in their seat, as if realizing that their assumptions about her had been completely wrong. She felt a small, private smile form on her lips. This was more than just music. It was a revelation, a moment of understanding that transcended words. As she played, she let herself become fully absorbed in the rhythm and flow of the piece. Time seemed to stretch, and the cafe faded away, leaving only the piano, the music, and the connection it created with those listening. She felt a freedom she had never experienced in public before, a release of years of hidden talent and silent practice. Every note resonated with her identity. Every chord reflected her determination to pursue her passion despite the obstacles she had faced. The customers reacted in ways she had never seen before. Some were quietly amazed, eyes wide, holding back gasps of surprise. Others nodded subtly, acknowledging the skill and emotion she poured into the music. The group who had once mocked her now seemed unsure how to respond. Their arrogance had disappeared, replaced by awe and, perhaps, a tinge of humility. They were realizing, slowly and reluctantly, that talent could appear in the most unexpected places. Her hands moved faster now, gliding over the keys with precision and grace. She allowed herself to add small flourishes, subtle improvisations that revealed her personal style and creativity. The music became more dynamic, shifting between gentle, soothing passages and bold, expressive sequences that seemed to fill every corner of the cafe. She could sense the emotions of those around her, the way the melody touched each listener differently, and it fueled her even more. One of the older customers, who had been quietly reading at a corner table, finally set down his newspaper and leaned back, eyes glistening with emotion. He whispered something to the person next to him, a quiet acknowledgement of the beauty of what he was hearing. Even the usually busy barista paused, a smile spreading across his face as he listened, appreciating the unexpected gift that had entered their routine day. The group near the piano began to shift in their seats, unable to hide their astonishment. One of them finally spoke, almost inaudibly, "I didn't know anyone could play like this." The words were simple, but they carried weight. She felt a rush of satisfaction, but she didn't stop. She continued playing, letting the music speak louder than any words could. She had no intention of proving herself to them in a competitive sense. Rather, she wanted to share her passion, to show the power of dedication and the beauty of expression through music. As the piece reached its climax, the cafe was completely silent. Even the clatter of dishes and cups seemed to fade into nothingness. Every ear was attuned to the piano. Every eye focused on her and the movement of her hands. She poured everything she had into the final notes, letting the music soar, powerful and uplifting, yet still intimate and personal. It was a moment suspended in time, a brief window where the ordinary world faded and only the melody remained. When the final chord resonated and slowly faded, the cafe seemed to exhale. Silence lingered for a moment, almost reverent, before it was broken by applause. It started softly, tentative at first, then grew louder as more customers joined in, some clapping enthusiastically, others smiling in appreciation. Even the group who had challenged her could not contain themselves. Their faces were a mixture of surprise, admiration, and a hint of embarrassment. They had expected a joke or a simple trick, and instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary. She sat there for a moment, catching her breath, her fingers still resting lightly on the keys. She allowed herself a small smile, feeling a mixture of relief, joy, and quiet pride. She had taken a risk, allowed herself to be vulnerable, and it had paid off in a way she could not have imagined. The music had transformed the space, had shifted the energy of the cafe, and had changed the way people saw her. She had not only played, she had communicated a part of herself that had long been hidden. Her co-workers approached cautiously, offering congratulations and whispered praise. They had always known her talent, but seeing it displayed so fully, in front of an audience that had doubted her, was something entirely different. One of them nodded toward the group near the piano, saying quietly, "They didn't expect that, did they?" She shook her head, smiling to herself. No, they certainly hadn't. The group that had initially mocked her now looked at her with a new respect. Their laughter had been replaced by attentive, thoughtful expressions. One of them spoke finally, his voice low. "That was incredible. I'm sorry we doubted you." It wasn't a grand apology, but it was genuine, and it carried more meaning than any words could have before her performance. She nodded politely, acknowledging their words without needing to elaborate. Her music had already said everything she wanted it to. She returned to her duties, moving with renewed energy and confidence. Customers continued to speak softly about the performance, their conversations filled with awe and admiration. She noticed the way the cafe seemed lighter somehow, as if the music had left an invisible mark on everyone present. Even the staff seemed more energized, smiling more freely, moving with a sense of purpose that mirrored the music she had shared. Throughout the day, she found herself glancing at the piano more often. It had become more than a piece of furniture. It was a symbol of her courage, a reminder that stepping into vulnerability could yield unexpected rewards. She realized that talent alone was not enough. It required bravery, the willingness to show the world a piece of oneself, even when there was a risk of judgment or ridicule. Today, she had found that courage, and it had transformed her in ways she had never anticipated. By mid-afternoon, the cafe had returned to its usual rhythm, but the echoes of the music lingered. She moved among the tables, taking orders and serving drinks, but she carried herself differently now. There was a quiet confidence in her movements, a subtle assurance that came from knowing she had faced doubt and emerged stronger. Customers seemed to notice it too, responding to her presence with smiles and warmth. Even those who had never approached the piano now seemed to view her differently, aware that she was more than just a waitress, more than a background figure in their day. As the day began to wind down, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Sitting for a brief second behind the counter, she thought about how far she had come, about the countless hours spent practicing alone, about the courage it had taken to step forward in front of people who had doubted her. The music she had shared had been a gift not only to the cafe but to herself, a reminder of her own strength, her passion, and her ability to inspire others without words. The group that had challenged her finally left, quietly slipping out the door with subdued expressions. She watched them go, feeling a sense of closure. They had come to doubt, to mock, to test her. And she had met that challenge not with anger, but with grace, talent, and determination. She knew that their perception of her had changed forever, and perhaps, in a small way, their perception of people in general. People could surprise, inspire, and exceed expectations when given the chance. As the cafe emptied and the evening approached, she allowed herself a small smile. Today had been extraordinary, a day that had begun like any other and had transformed into something unforgettable. She had faced ridicule, stepped into the unknown, and shared her music with courage and passion. In doing so, she had discovered a new sense of confidence and a reminder of the power of belief in oneself. The cafe had settled into a calm rhythm after the extraordinary moment earlier in the day, but the energy in the room had shifted in a way that she could feel even from behind the counter. There was a lightness, a subtle warmth, a sense that people had witnessed something rare and unforgettable. The customers who had been present during her performance continued to glance at the piano, sometimes exchanging quiet whispers, smiles, and nods. Some lingered, unwilling to leave, as if they were reluctant to let the memory of what they had just heard slip away. She moved through the cafe with renewed awareness, noticing the way people watched her now, not just as a waitress, but as someone remarkable in a quiet, unassuming way. She could feel a subtle respect emanating from the regulars, a newfound appreciation for her patience, her grace, and the depth that had previously been hidden behind a simple apron. The people who had come expecting a mundane morning now carried with them the memory of music that had reached into something deeper, something human and real. Her co-workers, who had silently admired her for years, approached with a different energy than usual. They exchanged quiet smiles and nods of approval, some brushing off their compliments as casual remarks, but she knew they were genuine. One of them leaned over and said softly, "I didn't realize you could do that. You were amazing." Another simply smiled, shaking their head, a mixture of disbelief and pride evident in their eyes. She returned their gestures with gratitude, her heart lifting at the shared understanding that this moment had bridged a gap between hidden talent and the recognition it deserved. Even the group who had challenged her earlier lingered longer than expected. They had initially come in with amusement and condescension, but now they sat quietly, absorbing the atmosphere. They spoke to each other in hushed tones, glancing occasionally at her, their earlier arrogance replaced by respect and perhaps a touch of humility. One of them finally leaned forward, resting an elbow on the table, and said quietly, "I didn't expect any of that. You're really talented." The words were simple, yet they carried weight, carrying the acknowledgement she had earned with courage and authenticity. She moved back to the piano, unable to resist the pull it had on her. It had become more than a piece of furniture in the cafe. It was a portal into another world, a place where she could express herself fully without fear of judgment. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, savoring the familiar sensation, feeling the resonance beneath her fingertips. The melody she began was soft at first, gentle and introspective, almost like a reflection on the events that had unfolded. But as she played, it grew, weaving through different emotions: joy, hope, and quiet triumph. The cafe responded in kind. Customers who had come in with mundane routines now seemed transformed, their attention drawn to the music in a way that touched something inside them. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound envelop them, while others simply listened, captivated by the sincerity and depth of the performance. Even those who had been skeptical earlier now appeared fully absorbed, their expressions softening as the melody unfolded. The music had become a shared experience, connecting everyone present in a way that transcended words or expectations. She noticed the subtle interactions around her. A mother watched her child, who had been fidgeting and restless, now completely still, mesmerized by the sound. An elderly man sitting alone at a corner table leaned forward, his hands folded on the table, eyes glistening as the notes reached him. The barista paused in the middle of preparing drinks, glancing over with a quiet smile, as if acknowledging the magic that had entered their everyday environment. Each small reaction reminded her of the power of music, not just as a performance, but as a bridge between people, a shared moment of human connection. The group that had initially mocked her now seemed more contemplative. They spoke in whispers, their earlier bravado gone, replaced by a quiet reflection. She could sense the shift in their perception, not just of her, but of what people were capable of when given the chance to shine. They were witnessing firsthand how hidden talent, combined with courage and perseverance, could transform expectations and challenge assumptions. It was a lesson in humility, delivered without arrogance or force, simply through the authenticity of her music. As she continued to play, she allowed herself to become fully immersed in the moment. Each note, each chord, carried a piece of her story. Years of practice, moments of doubt, small victories, and quiet determination. She had always known her talent, had always believed in it, but now she saw the impact it could have on others. The music had created a space where judgment, skepticism, and doubt had no place. In its stead was understanding, appreciation, and a quiet sense of awe. Her performance drew attention not only from those in the cafe but also from the way the energy of the room shifted. Conversations slowed, people moved more gently, and even the natural rhythm of the cafe seemed to adjust to the cadence of the music. There was a sense of shared presence, an unspoken agreement among everyone that this moment was extraordinary, a memory worth holding on to. She felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had contributed to this transformation, that her choice to step forward had created ripples far beyond her own experience. After finishing the next piece, she felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. The applause that followed was heartfelt, spontaneous, and enthusiastic. It was not just polite acknowledgement. It was genuine recognition of effort, skill, and courage. Customers clapped, smiled, and nodded, some even standing to show their appreciation. Her co-workers joined in, cheering softly, and even the previously skeptical group expressed their admiration through quiet, sincere applause. The room vibrated with energy, a mixture of celebration and shared experience that was rare and precious. She returned to her duties with a newfound calm. There was a subtle change in how she moved, how she interacted with customers, and how she approached her work. There was no longer the faint shadow of doubt or hesitation that had sometimes lingered. It had been replaced by confidence, quiet and unassuming but unmistakable. She smiled more freely, spoke with warmth, and carried herself with a sense of pride rooted not in vanity, but in accomplishment and authenticity. The customers continued to react in small ways throughout the day. Some lingered longer than usual, savoring the memory of the performance. Others approached her to express their gratitude, sharing words of encouragement or admiration. A few asked questions about the piano, her music, or how long she had been playing. She answered modestly, careful not to boast. But each interaction was a reminder that her talent had touched others in meaningful ways. The act of sharing something personal, something she had long kept hidden, had created connections she had never anticipated. Even the group that had doubted her earlier approached her before leaving. They offered simple but genuine words of acknowledgement, their previous skepticism replaced by respect. One of them said, "I hope you keep playing. The world needs to hear that kind of music." Another nodded in agreement, adding quietly, "Thank you for showing us what's possible." She accepted their words with a polite smile, feeling a sense of closure. Their recognition was not the goal, but it was a meaningful affirmation of her courage and authenticity. As the day wore on, she found herself reflecting on the experience. She realized that her music had not only transformed the perception of those around her, but it had also transformed her own understanding of herself. She had taken a risk, embraced vulnerability, and allowed her passion to be seen. The result had been more than applause. It had been connection, recognition, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had remained true to herself, The piano became her companion once again, not merely an instrument, but a symbol of courage and expression. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys during quieter moments, letting herself remember the feeling of the music flowing freely, the sense of shared humanity it had inspired. The cafe, which had once been just a workplace, now held memories of transformation, moments of awe, and a sense of possibility that lingered in the air long after the notes had faded. Her co-workers spoke quietly among themselves about the performance, expressing admiration and surprise. One said, "I never realized she had this inside her." Another nodded, adding, "She made the whole cafe feel different, alive, somehow." She listened with quiet pride, aware that her talent had not only impressed others, but had also changed the atmosphere, the energy, and the collective experience of the day. As evening approached, the cafe began to empty, but the echoes of her performance remained. Customers left with smiles, some exchanging soft words of gratitude or admiration. She tidied up the tables, restocked supplies, and carried herself with the calm satisfaction of someone who had faced a challenge and emerged stronger. The piano, standing quietly in its corner, seemed almost to glow in the dimming light, a silent witness to the transformation that had taken place. She paused for a moment, resting her hands on the keys once more, reflecting on how far she had come. The events of the day had shown her that talent alone was not enough. It required courage, the willingness to step into the unknown, and the resolve to remain authentic in the face of doubt. She had learned that sharing her gift could inspire, move, and connect people in ways she had never imagined. As she closed the cafe for the night, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Today had been extraordinary, not because of recognition or applause alone, but because it had been a day where authenticity, courage, and passion had converged to create something unforgettable. She had faced ridicule, embraced vulnerability, and allowed her talent to shine, touching the lives of everyone present. And in doing so, she had discovered a new sense of confidence, a deeper understanding of herself, and a reminder of the power of believing in one's own abilities. The next morning, she arrived at the cafe with the usual mixture of anticipation and quiet determination. The memory of yesterday's performance lingered in her mind, a soft but vivid reminder of what had happened and what could happen again. As she unlocked the door and stepped inside, she noticed that the atmosphere already felt different, lighter somehow, as if the energy from the day before had settled into the room, leaving traces of inspiration and admiration behind. Her co-workers greeted her warmly, their smiles more genuine than usual. A few of them even chuckled quietly, exchanging glances as if to say, "Yesterday was something else." She smiled in return, feeling the warmth of their acknowledgement but also recognizing that the real change was not in their praise, it was in herself. She had discovered a new confidence, a deeper understanding of what she was capable of, and a sense of courage that had grown from taking a risk and seeing it succeed. The cafe began to fill slowly, the morning rush approaching as usual. She moved through her tasks with the same efficiency and care as always, but now there was an added grace in her movements. Every cup of coffee, every plate of food, was delivered with a sense of pride and presence that went beyond simple professionalism. She had realized that the small acts of service, the human interactions that filled her day, were enhanced by the authenticity she carried within herself. It was not just about performing on the piano anymore. It was about living fully, with attention, with intention, and with courage. She noticed the group from yesterday had returned, this time entering quietly, their demeanor more subdued. They had come back not to ridicule, but perhaps to acknowledge what they had witnessed. She offered them a polite nod, and they responded with something closer to respect than amusement. One of them smiled and said softly, "We wanted to come back and hear more, if that's okay." She felt a flicker of warmth at their words, an unspoken recognition that their curiosity was genuine this time. She gestured toward the piano, inviting them to wait while she finished taking a few orders. Once the initial tasks were handled, she approached the piano again. She sat down, feeling the familiar keys beneath her fingers, the smooth texture grounding her in the moment. This time there was no hesitation, no doubt. She began to play a piece she had composed herself, one that carried a personal story, a blend of joy, struggle, hope, and quiet triumph. The melody flowed effortlessly, each note deliberate, expressive, and full of emotion. The group from yesterday listened intently, but it wasn't just them. Other customers who had come in were drawn to the sound, stopping in their tracks, their attention captured by the music that seemed to fill the entire cafe. She allowed herself to become completely absorbed in the music. Each chord, each delicate touch of the keys, told a story that words could not express. She thought about the years she had spent practicing in silence, the moments when she had doubted herself, and the small victories she had achieved along the way. The music was not just a performance. It was an extension of herself, a way to communicate everything she felt but had never shared. The room seemed to breathe with her, each listener caught in the rhythm of her story, the cadence of her experience. The group who had challenged her initially now watched with a mixture of awe and reflection. They had returned seeking more than entertainment. They had returned seeking understanding, a connection to the talent and passion they had underestimated. One of them finally spoke softly. "We didn't realize. We were missing something yesterday. You make it feel like we're hearing the world differently." His voice was tentative but sincere, acknowledging not only her skill, but the impact it had on those who listened. She nodded quietly, feeling the truth of his words ripple through her. It was more than validation. It was evidence that what she had shared had resonance beyond herself. As the piece reached its crescendo, she noticed other subtle reactions around the cafe. A young woman at a corner table had tears in her eyes, moved by the beauty and vulnerability of the music. A man sitting near the window had a small smile, a silent acknowledgement of the emotions the melody had stirred in him. Even the barista, usually focused entirely on coffee and orders, seemed absorbed, pausing to witness the artistry that had transformed the cafe into a temporary sanctuary. She felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything she had experienced before. When the final note lingered in the air and faded into silence, the applause that followed was immediate and heartfelt. It was louder, warmer, and more genuine than the day before. Customers clapped, some even standing, their faces reflecting amazement and gratitude. Her co-workers joined in enthusiastically, sharing in the collective recognition of something extraordinary that had been created in an ordinary cafe. The group who had returned earlier nodded, smiles wide, conveying a quiet respect that went beyond words. The moment felt complete, not just for her, but for everyone present, connected by the music and the courage behind it. After the applause settled, she returned to her duties, carrying a sense of purpose that permeated every interaction. Customers who had witnessed her performance spoke softly, some asking questions about the music or about her background. She answered modestly, careful not to boast, but each conversation reminded her that sharing her talent had a ripple effect. Moments of inspiration, admiration, and connection that extended beyond the immediate experience. The cafe, which had been a familiar routine, now held memories of transformation, and she felt grateful for the opportunity to be part of that story. As the day went on, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about the countless hours spent practicing alone, the quiet determination that had fueled her persistence, and the small victories that had built her confidence over time. She realized that talent alone was never enough. It required courage, the willingness to take risks, and the ability to trust oneself even in the face of doubt. She had learned that sharing her gift openly could inspire and touch others in ways she had never imagined. By mid-afternoon, the cafe had quieted down again, allowing her a rare moment to sit at the piano and play purely for herself. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, savoring the familiar textures, the sound of notes filling the room in a personal, intimate way. It was a private reflection, a reminder that the music belonged to her as much as it belonged to those who listened. She played a short, simple piece, letting the melodies remind her of why she had pursued music in the first place, the joy, the solace, and the expression it offered in moments both public and private. The manager approached quietly, watching her with a small smile. "I hope you know how much this has changed things here," he said. "People aren't just talking about the food or the service anymore, they're talking about the music. They're talking about you." She smiled, appreciating the sentiment but remaining grounded. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the impact, the connection, and the courage to step forward when it mattered most. The acknowledgement reinforced her sense of purpose, but also reminded her that the true reward lay in the shared experience of music, the human connection it fostered. As evening approached, the cafe began to empty, leaving only a few lingering customers who had stayed to savor the last moments of the day. She tidied tables, restocked supplies, and moved with quiet satisfaction, reflecting on the journey that had unfolded over the past 2 days. The piano, standing quietly in its corner, seemed almost to glow in the fading light, a silent witness to the transformation that had taken place. It had become more than an instrument. It was a symbol of courage, persistence, and the beauty of sharing one's gift with the world. Before leaving, she allowed herself a moment to sit at the piano once more, playing a simple, gentle melody that carried the emotions of the day. It was a song of gratitude, reflection, and quiet triumph, a personal reminder of how far she had come and how much she had grown. She played softly, savoring the sound, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but also the confidence to face them with grace. As she locked up the cafe and stepped outside into the cool evening air, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. The streets were quiet, and the city seemed calm, as if holding its breath after the intensity of the day. She walked home slowly, reflecting on the moments of courage, vulnerability, and connection that had shaped the experience. She realized that stepping into the spotlight, even in a small way, had allowed her to share not just music, but a piece of herself with the world. At home, she sat quietly with her notebook, pen in hand, capturing the melodies and emotions that had flowed through her over the past 2 days. She wrote freely, allowing the music and memories to take shape on paper. It was a ritual, a reminder that the creativity she carried was not confined to performance. It was a part of her identity, a force that could inspire and transform when nurtured and shared. Over the following days, word began to spread. Customers who had witnessed her performance returned, bringing friends, family, and colleagues. Some asked if she would play again, eager to experience the music that had touched them so deeply. She agreed, not out of obligation, but because she recognized the joy it brought to herself and others. Each performance, no matter how small, was an opportunity to connect, to inspire, and to remind people of the beauty that could exist in unexpected places. The group who had once doubted her became regular visitors. They never mocked again. Instead, they watched with appreciation, sometimes applauding quietly, sometimes simply listening. She noticed subtle changes in them over time, a newfound humility, a deeper understanding of people's capabilities, and a respect for talent and courage that went beyond appearances. Their presence became a reminder of how perceptions could shift when one took the risk to reveal authenticity and skill. Through it all, she continued to work at the cafe, but her perspective had changed. The job remained the same in many ways, serving tables, managing orders, interacting with customers, but she now carried with her a quiet confidence and a sense of purpose that colored every interaction. She realized that the true reward was not applause, recognition, or praise, but the moments of connection she fostered, the lives she touched, and the courage she had cultivated within herself. And so, day after day she played, not for fame, not for attention, but for the joy, for the expression, and for the connection it brought to herself and others. Each note, each melody, was a testament to persistence, courage, and the quiet power of sharing one's gift with the world. In the end, the laughter that once doubted her was replaced by admiration, and the cafe became a place where music and humanity intertwined, leaving memories that lingered long after the final notes had faded. She understood, finally, that her journey had never been just about music. It had been about bravery, authenticity, and the willingness to step into the unknown. And through it, she had discovered something invaluable. That when one dares to reveal their true self, the world responds in ways more beautiful than one could ever imagine.